All right, well, hello and welcome to this Zoom meeting of the Climate Reality Metro Boston chapter. I'm Keith Bergman from the chapter's leadership team, and I'm coming to you from Concord, Massachusetts tonight, where we've got folks from literally all over the world with us. The Boston Metro chapter. And in these times of social distancing, the Boston Metro chapter is pleased to be able to host a series of book talks with fellow climate reality leaders about their recently published books on climate. Last month, we spoke with Lisa Van Susteren about the impacts of climate change on mental health in her new book, Emotional Inflammation. And tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome another longtime friend and fellow mentor from Climate Reality, Harriet Shugarman, for her book talk about how to talk to your kids about climate change, turning angst into action. And after this introduction, Harriet's talk, we'll have a Q&A session facilitated by Patricia Nunez Garcia of our Boston Metro chapter. So those on the call, please use the chat function for questions that you may have for Harriet as we go along. Harriet Shugarman is recognized nationally as an activist, influencer, and connector in the climate movement, whose many efforts include teaching parents to talk to kids about climate change. Harriet has worked for more than 25 years on climate and sustainability issues as an economist, policy analyst, and communicator. She is currently an adjunct professor at a college in New Jersey and teaches world sustainability and climate change and society. And when I talked to Harriet a day or so ago, she was grading term papers. Harriet is recognized nationally as an activist influencer who in 2009 founded and became executive director of Climate Mama, an online community that reaches individuals in over 110 countries in all 50 states. Climate Mama's motto is tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, and don't be afraid. I've known Harriet for over a decade through the Climate Reality Project, founded by former Vice President Al Gore. Harriet and I were both trained in that the first year of that organization, and Harriet is a longtime mentor with Climate Reality and chairs the New York City Metro chapter. In 2017, Harriet was the recipient of the Climate Reality Green Ring Award, which is presented by Mr. Gore to an outstanding leader who's demonstrated exceptional commitment to their role as a climate communicator and activist. So I was pleased to be able to read Mr. Gore's glowing words about Harriet's new book, which provides a comprehensive description of the climate crisis, how to communicate it to the children in your life, and how you can work together to be part of its solutions. So well-deserved praise for Harriet. Harriet's profile in Mr. Gore's 2017 book, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power, here's my autographed copy. Harriet's book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Climate Change, was released yesterday by New Society Publishers. So congratulations, Harriet, on the book launch. In fact, Harriet was originally scheduled to be out on her book tour, which would have brought her to right here where I am in Concord last week. So while we're hoping to be able to see Harriet in person sometime here soon, we are especially delighted that Harriet could make herself available tonight for this virtual book talk with our chapter members and friends. So we are glad that you can come and talk to us tonight, Harriet, and I'm happy to give you the floor for tonight, and welcome.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for that amazing and awesome introduction, and for being a friend and a mentor to me for all these years. And I am thrilled to be in Boston, or well, actually with all of you from everywhere, but to be, as you could tell from Keith's, the slides that he kindly showed, with my climate reality family. And so I'm hoping that we can actually, have more of a conversation than me just talking for a really long time. But let me give you a little intro about the book and some of the things in it, and then I'd just love to have a conversation with all of you. So we'll see how that goes, Patricia. If that works for you, then I'd love to do that. I want to start though, and I asked Patricia and Keith if it would be okay, given his introduction, and then I want to just read, and again, this sort of not takes away from, because it's why I'm doing this, but I want to read a little bit from the book, just about 4 or 5 paragraphs at the beginning of the book. And it's really a book that is, comes from my heart, but comes from my being empowered and inspired and encouraged by my climate reality family, truly. And so I want to read a little bit, just at the beginning. So this is just in the start of the book. In 2006, the movie An Inconvenient Truth opened in theaters across the US. And well, I think so this part is not in the book, but I just want to say, when I talk to my students about the film An Inconvenient Truth and ask them if they've seen it or if they know who Mr. Gore is, surprisingly, many of them, first of all, have not heard of the movie. And again, some of them, then I'll remind them who, the illustrious career of Mr. Gore. But it reminds me how old I am sometimes. So they tell me that they weren't even in grade school in 2006, so then it dates me. But anyways, so in 2006, the movie An Inconvenient Truth opened in theaters across the US, and the public's consciousness of the implications of global warming was ignited. I knew then that my life would be forever changed. After seeing the movie, my eyes were open wide, and I wouldn't let them shut. I felt that I had a role and a responsibility to help others open their own eyes, to make them understand the extent of the climate crisis we had set in motion. I began to look for ways to put my passion into action. Like many others, I wanted to be involved in something bigger than myself, and here it was, right in front of me. 8 months after I saw the movie An Inconvenient Truth, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, at one of the first group trainings of the newly formed Climate Project, now known as the Climate Reality Project. Around a table in a Nashville hotel ballroom, I found myself chatting and sharing my concerns and hopes with people who, on the surface, seemed very different from me: an ordained minister, an elected municipal official from the South, an NFL football player, and a climate scientist. Yet I quickly came to realize that these people were actually very similar to me. They understood intimately what I was thinking and feeling without me having to explain it. The 150 or so amazing people filling the Nashville hotel ballroom came from every corner of the country and every walk of life. They all came to Nashville ready, willing, and able to take a stand and make their voices heard. We were all in agreement. It was up to us to raise the alarm. Our future demanded it. Strength in numbers, all of a sudden, had a direct and powerful meaning to me. My marching orders on leaving Nashville were crystal clear: educate, empower, and activate my community on the climate crisis. Then I want to just skip to one other line on the next page. I have stayed actively involved with my climate reality family and with the climate reality organization that helped launch the trajectory of my climate-focused career. I have come to recognize that my work on the climate crisis is the greatest work of my life. So before I cry, and I'm reading this because we're at the Boston chapter of Climate Reality. We're at a meeting of the Climate Reality chapter. And so truly, I would not have just been empowered all along my journey if it wasn't for all of you and the people that I have met. And I put somewhere else in there, and really it's not the focus of the book, but I'm making it. I just want to share it with you that I've met I work with many wonderful organizations and people from many truly incredible climate and environment and justice and civic organizations. But for some reason, and I truly feel this, the people that I've met through Climate Reality are the ones who hold me up, who let me cry with them, who I share my joys and happiness with. And so I want to just start, Keith, by sharing that with you all. So that, thank you. And thanks for being on this Zoom call and being part of the chapter. And I wrote the book for many years in my head. As Keith said, I started Climate Mama back in 2009. At that time, I was looking for someplace. I came back in 2007 from the training, and I had worked previously at the United Nations with the IMF on this very big stage, and then I had moved to the burbs and had little kids and was trying to figure out parenting after I learned all of this really powerful information at the training. And again, that was a long time ago, right? So I feel people are still, we're still figuring all that out and still coming to that. But at that time, I was trying to find a place online where I could learn more. How do I talk to my kids? What's happening? What is the climate crisis about? And there wasn't anything geared specifically to parents. And so I decided, I was empowered to be, involved, and I was going to start something. And I started Climate Mama, and I started writing, and there was a blog to it, and I wrote much of the blog. And so I was writing a lot on how do we showcase what parents are doing? How do we, as parents, show our kids we're being involved? But it wasn't until about 2 years ago, and I talked about it in my head that I was going to write this book for a long time. But seeing the youth movement rise up over the past couple of years, and not that we didn't have an active youth movement. I mean, the whole climate movement, and for those of you that have been involved in a long time, it's there, but it's not that big, right? We think it's our whole world in some ways, but actually, the majority of the people in the United States, and maybe it's different in Japan, I would hope, Chris, or I know it's somewhat different in Canada, but we're still struggling with helping people understand the realities of the climate crisis. And our motto at Climate Mama is tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, and don't be afraid. And those are things that probably your parents taught you, that everyone, we teach our children as well. But when it comes to the climate crisis, should we have to still be, demanding people hear the truth? But in this, unfortunately, the truth is questioned in so many ways. So in any event, in 2018, all of a sudden, there were youth voices that were breaking through the noise, that were being heard. And they were young voices. There were kids in elementary school, middle school, high school, college. And all of a sudden, people were paying attention. And I was hearing from a lot of colleagues and friends, I think because of Climate Mama, like, what do I say to my kids? They're mad, they're angry, they're disappointed, they're going out in the streets, they're in their rooms, they're, all these different scenarios. And I was like, this is my next step. This is what I have to do. I have to share more about what I've been talking about on the blog and when I talk to people, but actually put it in a book and just lay it all out. And the book itself talks about the science. It talks about the grief that we go through, because it's really sad, right? All of us here understand that. It talks about the politics, the justice issues, and again, just little snippets, because it's not that was the thing with the publisher. I'd written a book that was probably 2 or 3 times as long as this, and they're like, it's parents, they're busy, it can't be more than 150 pages. Well, I think it's 192 pages, but in any event, lots of things got taken out, and it got organized in a different way, how they wanted it. But I'm happy with how it turned out, and there are some chapters that take it by age group. And what I did too, last June, so I got the contract with the publishing house last April, and sort of had to get things into them by the end of July. And so I'd written quite a bit of it, but then they started telling me, well, you need to do it by age. You know, people want to hear, what do I tell somebody in kindergarten? What do I tell? And I was like, well, it's different depending on each kid because every child is different. But then they were very insistent there was going to be chapters like that. So I decided to reach out to my climate reality family, actually, to people that I know in the movement that have children, that are activists, that are educators, and ask them, you know, some of their advice. And so I'm happy to be able to include the words and wisdom of other people besides myself in the book on what they have to say as well. And I think it also gives the book just a different perspectives because, you know, unapologetically, it's my story. I've written it. It has all of my biases with it. Being raised, Chris, in Edmonton, right? I mean, there are lots of stuff that comes there too, in a positive and you know, just in different ways. So, and I make that really clear in the beginning to it. It is my story because I feel like, well, not just my story. I lay it out. It's how I'm telling what's happened, but based on how I've lived, and that's very different from how everyone else here and the experiences that we all bring. But I think there's lots of shared experiences and shared knowledge when we come to those things about telling the truth and showing through our actions, and then that hardest one of not being afraid and taking whether one step or multiple steps or giant leaps, and showing our children that we can do that. So those are important concepts that I talk about in the book. I talk about, you know, people always ask me, I bet you all get that too as climate leaders and as educators, you know, tell me 3 things. I'm really busy. I just need to know, you know, what can I do? Because I'll do it, but I only can do 3 things. And, you know, we know, right? There are as many things as there are people on this planet, and I think we have to lead with our passions, and that will direct us and take us forward. But so I did, in the end, here's my 3 things, and one is to be a participant in our democracy. So that means voting, but it also means maybe running for office or holding our elected officials' feet to the fire and showing our children that they can do that too, even if they're not old enough, that they can be empowered to contact their elected official, to write a picture, or, you know, to different ways. So I talk about that. I talk about planting seeds and planting gardens, figuratively and literally, because those are things that we have to do as well. So I do, you know, try to lay things out directly as well. And today I was on for a little bit of time on a climate reality webinar, and some of you might have been on it too. But one of the things there was about telling your own story, was to talk to legislators, but telling your story. And so I think also helping our children, once they understand the realities, depending what age they're at, and you know, we can craft things as family plans and what we can do, but we have to be able to share our stories and share our concerns and share our hopes, and we have to help them, you know, again, depending, or maybe they help us, let them speak for themselves as well, but let them know we're visioning a future and now that is one where they can thrive, not just survive, where it isn't, you know, the book of Revelations, as Mr. Gore likes to say, you know, not likes to say, is if we don't do something, that's what we'll be living in. That actually, because of the science, so telling the truth, what scientists are telling us, yes, the door is closing, right? It's spring-loaded, it's coming back, we're reaching tipping points, but we haven't passed through all of them. I teach planetary the planetary boundaries to my college students, and yes, we're passing through some of those, and yes, things are not going to be the same. There's no going back to normal pre-COVID, or, you know, even if we hadn't had this terrible pandemic take over our lives at the moment. but we need to, when we come back, building forward, and right now we need to vision what that's going to look like, and it needs to be a sustainable venture forward. It needs to be something that takes climate seriously and with the seriousness that's there. So I think all of those are part of the stories that we weave together and show our children that we actually, we're not, whereas personally we might feel some days, we don't want to get out of bed, we want to pull the covers over, and life is really not a life, but just the story, the reality that we know is not just worrisome, it's terrifying in many ways, but we are holding on to that, and then we're going to envision something different because we all came together, because we had leaders that saw this, and we are all part of making that happen. So those are, I think, what we need to do is we need to educate ourselves, and that's really part of what the book is about. The main part of it is that we as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, so however we are, that we care about young people's lives, we need to really understand, and I think that's what climate reality is all about too, right? It's about understanding what's happening and then showing people what's possible. So that's a big part of what I try to convey in the book. So I think I talked for 15 or 20 minutes. I can continue. I like to talk, Patricia, but I also would love to, if people want to go in a certain direction, or if you have questions, I'm happy to just be quiet for a minute and see what you think.
Thanks very much, Harriet. It's I always love to hear the stories of how people came to to climate reality, or had their epiphany where the light bulb went on, and I really appreciate hearing yours. I'd say let's hear some questions. Patricia, do you want to start us off in the lightning round?
Thank you, Keith. Yes, and thank you, Harriet, for explaining all the process and the journey that took you to help us mothers and fathers and caregivers of younger adults or even toddlers, and how they're going to be getting all this information and then digesting it, and what are they going to do about it, because they want to be involved. So it's great to have your talk and also something in print. Congratulations on the book. So because also you mentioned this terrible pandemic that is now changing our lives in many ways, could you talk about how COVID-19, this emergency, relates to climate change and how they're linked, and particularly in the context and the world of children and teens, how they are going to live through it, and how they can maybe grasp this as an opportunity to really garner the power of agency, but how do we lead them, and how do these two big issues collide so that we can take the opportunity to get prepared?
Yeah, and it's interesting, Patricia, because I actually, I did a talk a few weeks ago, and I took passages from the book, and and where it said climate change or climate crisis, I substituted COVID-19. And it was amazing to me, even, that there are so many similar ways that we can explain both of these emergencies, crises that we're facing, and even use the same language and the same words. And actually, I'll send you, I have a post that I wrote about that just takes out those just a few passages. But I think that that clearly we are dealing with two giant, the COVID-19 is just a compression in a moment, and of this bigger crisis that we're already living with, climate change, that still seems somehow farther away, but we're forced into it. So it seems too big to get our arms around for our kids. And I think that helping them understand and see, and pointing out how our communities are coming together. And so, I struggle with this, and I'd be curious, your opinions as well too. But we understand it. We're dealing with an emergency, and so individual actions are important to move people along the road. And I talk about that in the book, and what we show our children, that they can take actions. In our house, we do change our energy use. We plant a garden. We do different things, but recognizing the emergency we face, we know too that we need systemic change. We need big changes. And living COVID-19 now, I, have come and working, having the book come out and thinking about the book and things a lot, I've come to also be excited as a parent, for parents to be able to share too. Well, it may be frustrating federally what we're seeing happen in the United States, or not happen on climate and on COVID. Perhaps the things are mixed up. There isn't a coordinated response, but we're seeing how our individual actions grow as a community, how communities are coming together to make masks, how they're coming together to provide food for healthcare workers, and it is making a difference. We are personally doing hard things, right? We are staying in our homes, our apartments. We are not going out. We are not seeing our grandparents, because we're doing it to protect our grandparents, to protect people we don't know. And so to share with children that the power that we have to actually do that, these hard things, and then come together as a community, I think helps, at least for me, as part of that explanation and that story, that we actually can, climate seems too big or too disastrous, or the story, many things that I think involved the youth movement, and in activating it was the 2018 reports, both the IPCC report and the National Climate Assessment reports, both giving us this 12-year window, 2030 window of passing thresholds. And I think that going through this now, boom, all of a sudden we're in it. Who would have thought that there was any way you would have Americans staying willingly, in their homes, so that we could protect other people. It shows us we can do hard things, because we'll have to do hard things to address the climate crisis. So I think that's one critical and important thing. I think for those that, with younger kids and that can get out of their homes to just walk around the neighborhood or on the street, that we are able to hear nature, hear birds, hear, not that it wasn't there before maybe, but we couldn't, our noise is quieter. We're quieter. Literally, right? Scientists are telling us that the noise level on the planet has, they measure it. It's just less than it was. So I think people are all over, are seeing nature in a way they didn't see it before because they were too busy. So I think with our children, reminding them of that, to really listen and to hear. Those are opportunities for younger kids, for us to do that, and all of us too. So I think we're seeing that as well. I think we're seeing, different than climate, we're seeing pollution dissipate, right? And I think that also there's something to explain the difference between climate pollution, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that, scientists, the reports I've been reading now they're telling us that perhaps, we could see a 6 to 8% drop in carbon emissions this year. But if we are to meet the Paris Agreement goals by 2030, we need to do 7% every year. So clearly we can't do it this way, right? So it also opens up that conversation about how important drawdown is, right? Of drawing down. So there are ways to bring the science in, to bring the discussion about, and I think the justice issues, right? It's so important as climate reality, and that we share and talk about that our climate crisis is not impacting everybody the same. We're all experiencing it. We're all experiencing COVID-19, but we are not all experiencing it the same way. And many of those justice issues, who's being impacted worst and first, are also there are commonalities that we can share with the COVID-19 story. So those are a few things.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harriet. Speaking to where you're telling us about the federal government or state governments or communities taking action, when you talk about climate change with children, with teens, what comments and arguments do you include there for their understanding, their language, that talk about the statement that science matters, that facts matter, and that they should be the basis of the conversation around this topic? What keywords and considerations do you plug in there so that they just innately know that that is something important to consider and also to expect from who they're receiving that information or opinions on climate change?
It's complicated now, right? Because we are seeing science and facts questioned by authority figures that previously we would have not expected that from. So that gets complicated. But I think that we are also seeing policy driven on climate in many municipalities and many states that is based on science, that is being successful, and there are really great examples of positive actions that are happening. You know, in Massachusetts, I think the work that Mothers Out Front has done to identify, you know, a lot of things with gas that's leaking, with the importance of energy reduction, with pushing government officials, not just Mothers Out Front, I'm just naming that as a parent climate group, but how many different communities have come together to speak about what needs to be done at a state level. And we can show young people, other young people that are doing things in a positive way. There's an organization run by a climate reality leader called Young Voices for the Planet, Lynn Cherry, and she does short videos of young people taking action in their communities, and based on science, on realities and what's happening in their community, and they are making things change. And they're teens, they're grade school kids, they're not old enough to vote, but they're creating change from their elected officials. So I think us as parents showing children, other youth leaders that are actually being listened to and heard, and helping policy get developed or laws get changed is empowering for them to know that actually that is happening, and to show them that people are listening to science and looking at, we don't even have to look to other countries, we just have to look, maybe, you know, come down a level from the federal level right now to what's happening in certain states, how states are coming together in different parts of the country to work on climate policy. So I think there, you know, again, and it should be place-based for kids, if you can make it that way, to find positive examples in your own community of things that are happening, so they can see that there is positive change happening. And, you know, some of it is small, but some of it actually is really big. And I think seeing too how, you know, in terms of renewable energy and the positive way that is really growing as a percentage of state and local levels, the community supported energy that's happening. There's a lot of things happening that are positive that schools are doing, right, to show their kids. And so if it's not happening at your child's school, then those kind of things, you know, that are science-based, that schools are doing because it actually helps them save money, in addition to other things too. Why isn't it happening at their school? So that can happen. Or why, you know, as a parent, show your kid you're concerned about the curriculum that's at their school, because it's hard for parents to say, or teachers, you know, to have to teach climate if they're not being trained in it. And it should be, teaching climate should be in art class, it should be in drama, it should be in math and science, right? It needs to be across curricular. So, and if that isn't happening, as a parent, you know, when our kids tell us that, we should be talking, because it needs to also, the principal has to support that, the superintendent has to support that, so the teachers can get trained. So, because they're already pressed and stressed so far. So I'm not sure, did I answer your question, or I just went off on a tangent, but yeah.
It's a hard topic. I don't blame you, because it has to have a lot of components to it. We definitely need to consider a lot of things. But let me go to the next question. And you mentioned this, that the question wanted, you know, age 0 to 3. What do you say? Age 3 to whatever. What do you say? So, and maybe don't give us the whole book guideline, but at least a glimpse of what changes come from. Maybe should we start with the toddler? I have almost a 3-year-old. How, you know, I took him to the Climate March and had a little thing that had said no planet B or whatever, but I can't talk to him. So what are the milestones to teach them and talk to them about climate change in a different light with more information, and what highlights are there in little periods, you know, of their life until they are mature enough? And I know every kid is different. Maybe someone at 16 is ready and others are ready at 18 for the real information. But what changes do you see, and how do we keep them informed, because it's fair for them to be informed without scaring them, without doing the opposite of what we want? We want them to take action. So how do we bring about that security and confidence and agency, power of agency, to continue?
Yeah, such a good question, and I think you answered it too in some ways. And you know, the experts, the psychologists, the teachers, the people that I have consulted, because that is right. And again, as we talk about with climate reality, right? Who, you know, that is not. I haven't had a long history in that, although as Climate Mama we talk about that. But for a toddler or someone that is not in school yet, they need to be loved, they need to be cared for, they, you know, you need to show them they're protected, and that is the most important, of course, critically, right? You're not going to scare them, give them all these facts they can't understand, but you took your child to a climate march. They may never remember that, you know, 3 years old, who remembers being 3, but they'll see pictures or video or something that was important to you. So they know what's important to you. We read to them about nature, about trees. Young children have this sort of innate love of nature, and having them spend time, whether it's, you know, on a tiny patch of ground, picking up an earthworm, or, you know, being under a tree, reading a book, all of those things for very young kids, just having them understand. And I think, you know, we started at the beginning, or maybe, you know, talking about this disconnect of people from nature, and children from nature. So that is important from a very early age. And that is part of the climate story, to understand what's there and what's not. And then what those transitions, moving to what we can tell them more and more, will be child dependent. But as, you know, broadly, as they enter grade school, and, you know, I have actually Rosemary and we share a dear friend who was a kindergarten teacher in New York City for 40 years. And her children, her kindergarten students, were the most amazing activists, and actually went to city council in New York City, you know, on a pesticide issue, but she could talk to them about these things, and kids understand. They know who the good guy is, they know who the bad guy, you know, at whatever age. They understand if something isn't fair, or, you know, and you can help them learn part of those stories. So to say someone's 5 years old, they can't hear it, they're too young, they can begin to understand it. They can begin to understand their power. And so they can start learning about, you know, why it's important that, you know, mommy and daddies turn out the lights and save energy. Why is it important that we take public transportation? Why is it that some people are able, you know, in their classes are, you know, able to have more than other? Why are people, you know, what are the differences? And then how do some of those differences affect each of us. So that justice issue, intergenerational movement building, seeing grandparents, seeing elders with young people, all of those things can happen younger than you would expect. And also at a point where I think that our children are seeing and hearing so much, even, in maybe not a 3-year-old, because you can monitor and control what they can see. But once they're in grade school, once, they're in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and that we all have access to the internet and many things, you need to be the one that shares some of those things with them, because they're going to hear about it, right? Greta Thunberg, most kids are hearing about this young girl, or maybe they're not, but many are. And what is she doing? Why did she do that? Explain that to me. So there are ways to tell the story without it being scary, with it being empowering and uplifting. And there are, so, at each of those milestone points, I put it in, toddlers to elementary school, middle school, and then high school and college, and then beyond. Because, for people that have grown children with children of their own, they may not be where you are. They may not have focused on this. And, there's the Elders Climate Action Network, which is awesome. And people are coming as grandparents because they care about what's happening and learning about the climate crisis. And many of their children who may be, parents of their own, may not understand what's at stake. So there's ways to talk to, people that are in their 20s and 30s, talking to them about divestment, talking to them about, what do they talk about at work? So I think there are milestones, there are ways to do it. I do talk about that in the book. I think it is important. But to the point that we may think our children are too young, they're learning about this, they're seeing it, and we can't keep it from them. So finding ways to explain it. We have an emergency, you probably have a fire escape plan from your house. Just even at a young age, where do we go to meet for that emergency? We should have climate emergency plans, and build it into your family plan. So there are lots of things we can do that actually are empowering and not scary.
Thank you very much. We have another question here, and the question is from Chris. Yes, are there any online curriculum resources you recommend for middle school and high school teachers?
Yes, absolutely, Chris. There are. I had mentioned one, Young Voices for the Planet, which also has middle school and high school. The Alliance for Climate Education, ACE, has some really great resources, and I can send, there's a bunch, and I actually do a resource section in the book, and I think, and I list 10, there's so many, but I put them in blocks of 10. But so I have a bunch, I can send them to you, or I can send them to Patricia and she can make them available. But there's some really great resources that are there. We don't need to recreate the wheel on that. Yeah.
And I have one more question here, Harriet. So two with this kind of one question. What do you do when you're competing with other sources of information? For example, the TV, the government leaders, the other family members that might not be expressing opinions or facts or information about climate change similar to what you have taught your kids. What do you do with that competing source of information?
Yeah, it's not so, it's complicated, right? Because, and I used to, so what I did and what I do now are different. I'm not sure about all of you. I clearly, in those 6 Americas that the Yale climate talks about, Yale climate, they divide us into 6 Americas, and there's the deniers that went in, and there's the extreme people. I'm totally on that extreme end, right? And I'm sure many of us here are. And so my family would warn me when I would come for Thanksgiving, or we would get together, just be nice to Uncle Bob, don't say anything. Don't, this is family time. You know, you live on the Northeast, we're in Alberta, let's just be calm. Or remember, we're in Alberta, you have to be careful what you say. And I would get frustrated that my family, who should just, you know, let me talk and let me share this, would actually tell me that. And I think that we need to talk about those hard things, but from a place of love, from a place, there's a way to frame it instead of, you know, I was more of a bull in the china shop kind of person when I would first, like, you know, this is what I learned. I know, have you read this? Have you seen this? And you know, what I tell my kids and what I write about in the book is that we can't shy away from those hard conversations because we need to have them. But in our family, we are probably a trusted messenger, right? There are trusted messengers in different groups who people, and in this crazy time of, you know, fake news and who do you trust, and you can get your media wherever you want and get your facts that you want. You are a trusted messenger to your family, to your kids. And I think that we can move, we can at least show our kids, if Uncle Bob might never change his mind, he knows it, but we have some shared commonalities as a family, and that we can have that conversation. And for your kids, even when they're young, to see you having that conversation that isn't that easy, but in a way that comes from a place of love, of caring, right? Your concern. This is something that worries you and you want to share that. I think that that's important for them to see, whatever age it is. And, you know, when they're younger, they're just there and they know that you're sharing your feelings. Remember when my kids went from being, coming with me to everything and coming to rallies and protests and, you know, being excited to march with me to being embarrassed by me, I think you were. And they didn't want to come anymore. They didn't want mom to be that activist mom. And so I think we end up being different people too, right? Sometimes we're that super dad, super mom, super woman, right? That, you know, we do all these things. We march, we rally, we speak at state house steps. We do all these things. And then other days we're, you know, going to the grocery store, we're going to a meeting, we're just trying to get dinner on the table and get home from work. And now that we can't go to work outside of our house, but we're trying to do all those things. And I think that and I've gotten way off topic because you asked me how to come back to that, you know, cutting through the noise. And I think there are so many, you know, the science-based organizations that share those facts, that have children's websites, that have it at all different levels. And when it comes to climate change, and it's not, reminding our kids it's not a partisan issue, it shouldn't be political, even though it gets political. There are facts, and there are so many different channels of different scientists that have looked at peer-reviewed data, and we can show our kids that. And certainly politicians can have, you know, what they do with the facts, that how we develop policy, and we can talk to our kids about that, how it's interpreted. But the facts are, our climate is changing, we are causing it to change, it's really bad, but there are things we can do, right? Those are the facts. And so we can explain those in a simple way, depending on the age, or in a more detailed way, because we have those facts at our fingertips. And that is irrefutable. So I think it was Patrick Moynihan, who's a senator from New York, a congressperson from New York, and he said, Senator Moynihan, he's a senator, excuse me, that you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. And reminding our kids about that is important.
Thanks, Harriet. It looked like we have to send our kids with an elevator pitch of what they have to say, you know, but the information that they have to disclose to their whoever they're talking to about climate change, and make them feel confident of what they know is a fact. Because they will encounter resistance, and sometimes I worry about the children that are around me, that are close to me, but also the ones that I'm helping become activists and involved in climate action. It's like, the resistance can get ugly at some point, and we're dealing with young souls that also, and that's something that worries me too. We're sending them to battle, and how. And my last question would be, how to protect them from what they can be exposed to when they are talking about climate change and acting on climate justice and all these issues that matter with science behind them. But how do you send them protected to this?
Yeah, it's terrible, right? How our children end up being targets sometimes of this vitriol and this really backlash. But I think reminding them and showing them it doesn't rest on their shoulders alone, just like it doesn't rest on our shoulders alone, right? It's too big of a problem. It's going to take all of us. We are going to lead with our passions on these things. Those of our children that are activists that want to be on the front lines, to hold them, to hug them, to let them know too that there are many people, and many, many, many more every single day, that are recognizing the crisis that we're facing and that are working on it. And so, I think for people to say, oh yeah, and I was talking about that, it's exciting how the youth voice has, we're listening and hearing it, but we also must remember that it doesn't, we can't say, okay, good, oh, boom, I'm done, because the youth are speaking. And so because I think sometimes some of those young people that are leading feel like it's all on their shoulders, right? That now, and it's terrible. They should be able to be in school. They shouldn't have to be striking every Friday, or, things are in this moment different, but that isn't fair. And that is forced on them, because what we didn't know and what we've created. But also, I think, to help them see there are others there, and to protect them. When that happens, when they're attacked, then we should be there like, ferocious mother bears, or that is not okay. There are lines that can't be crossed. Those kind of things are not all right. So I think just making sure they remember that there are many others, that it's intergenerational. That it's not all of us that are the elders, that we know this is the greatest challenge we'll face in our lifetime. And we know, and we are working hard. So I think there are some young people that maybe feel, it's all our fault, and it is, in that way, but there are many of us, that all of us here, right, that really care. We're working to change laws. We're working to support companies, individuals, etc., that see the possibilities, and we can help our young people see opportunities to work on the climate crisis, because it's something we all will be working on for the rest of our lives. But when and if they are attacked or face that, we're shut it out, because that's not okay, and they should just shut it out too. And we move around it and show them how to move and pivot around it too.
Thank you very much. We have one question, and I am very interested in your answer to this one too. They are asking for advice for forming a family emergency climate plan. Like the case of a tornado or fires, like what is your blueprint or guideline for that? A lot of people are interested in this.
Yeah, and I've had some really interesting talks with people about what does that look like, and I find that an exciting thing, actually, for families to develop, and it should be, it has to be place-based too, right? If you live in a community that has a buffer zone near forests, right? What are you, and we've seen what's happened in California and Washington and Idaho, in Colorado with forest fires, right? So part of having a climate plan, also addressing that as an emergency. We need masks, right? We should have them there. So all of these are climate impact. It's not in the long term, it's in the immediate. What could happen? Do you live near the ocean? Do you live on the shore? You know, there are big storms. What is our plan? So part of the climate plan is part of an emergency plan, but it's building in that discussion about these are the impacts of the climate crisis, these extreme weather events. These things are part of our lives now. And so just as, you know, we could have a fire with a candle burning, these are real things that actually are impacting people and communities around us. And so depending on your community, what does that look like? You know, are you in a flood zone? Actually, you should have a blow-up boat, you know, maybe they're actually in your house. Is that something that your school district has if you're on the front lines in a flood zone, you know? So I think those, not imagining the worst, but imagining how are you going to prepare? So, right, imagining a better future is part of what we want to share with our kids, but also that adaptation and resiliency. How do we build that, and how do we build that into a climate plan? So, you know, how do we, you know, we talk about, not with our kids, maybe depending how old they are, but right at the UN where I worked is mitigation, adaptation, resiliency. Those are buzzwords that are used. Well, how do we actually build that part in? So from the mitigation, what are you doing as part of your climate plan to lower greenhouse gases in your own house? You know, are you planting trees? Are you being more energy efficient? Are you looking at what you're eating, where you're getting your food from? That's part of the climate plan. Are you, you know, how do we deal with the emergencies that arise? That's part of your climate plan. Do you watch a weekly movie that's about, you know, different parts of the world or nature, you know, build that in, depending again how old your kids are. But there's so many things you can build in a positive way. Is it every week we call our city official, or every 2 weeks we write a letter to our member of Congress? You know, build in civic actions and make that part of your plan. So there are, you know, again, depending on the ages, and there are different parts that can be part of that.
Very good. Well,
That's really great. I think that after this, I have homework to start planning what we need both. Thank you.
Great. Patricia, thank you so much for moderating the question and answer. And Harriet, thank you for being here with us. Thanks to all those who are joined us on the call, and to those who are planning to watch it afterwards, if we're not available this hour. Any final words, Harriet, that you want to leave us with? Anything that you haven't said yet that you want to be sure to say?
I would just like to thank you all for being here. I am, as I started, so proud to be part of this Climate Reality family. I hope that perhaps maybe the Boston Metro chapter and us at the New York City Metro chapter, maybe there are some things that we can talk about or work on together. So I'd love, you know, to see regionally things that we can do, and yeah, just keep doing all the great work that you're doing. And thank you for letting me share more about my book. And I'm happy that it came out yesterday and I get to talk about it today with all of you. Thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. And we're hopefully we'll keep up this our series of book talks here at the Boston Metro chapter. We've got an inspiring group of climate reality leaders that we get to work with and to be part of a larger group. So thanks to all of you tonight, and stay safe.